Uh, Thanks for being on the panel. Um, we are going to start with opening remarks from Laurie Richard. So why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Thank you. So I will say a few words as a background for the discussions on platform responsibilities. And I want to start just kind of a quick reminder of the sort of the history. And really, in a nutshell, and I think most of you will know this, but in the late 20th century, so last century, really, right? When the internet, as we know it today, was young, policymakers and legislators thought it advisable, I think it's fair to say, to ensure that the providers of the critical internet infrastructure would be shielded against vexatious lawsuits in order to allow these service providers to grow and develop. So as a result, they were granted certain liability privileges, and for short, I think they are commonly known as safe harbors. Let's call them that. And just I think it's worth reminding us that as a sort of a quid pro quo of that, they were also required to act as diligent economic operators. And as part of that deal, if you will, the quid pro quo was that once they were being notified or they gained awareness of infringements, then they were expected to stop the infringing activity. And in broad terms, these type of deals or legislation were the basis for the US DMCA, which was, if I recall correctly, was enacted in 1998, the EU e-commerce directive in 2000, and similar laws in a number of countries, including India, Japan, China, and so forth. So that's the history. And now let's fast forward 20 years. And we look at the situation today. And I think it's correct to say that the internet has changed beyond recognition. We have services that have completely changed, didn't exist at the time when these laws were introduced. The business model have completely changed. And if we look at the music industry has fundamentally changed. So the issue is that the laws have not changed, and here is the problem, as far as we can see it. The laws that were enacted 20 years ago, which is I don't know how many light years in internet terms, but a long time ago, right? Those laws, in many respects, are either not fit for purpose, or they've been misapplied along the years. So the problem we see is that certain services, in particular what we call user upload content services, that could not have been imagined in 1998 or 2000, they are now amassing hundreds of millions of users, even over a billion users, at least in one case, right? And they've also become the main channels for distributing copyright content. And yet, some of these services, most of these services, claim the same liability privileges that were originally intended for purely passive, automatic, and technical services. And the result of this is what we see is a very serious distortion in the digital marketplace. Because these services, and I think the most notorious case probably is the YouTube, which indeed has over 1 billion users globally, gain access to content and distribute content, in particular music, while at the same time claiming to have the benefit of the safe harbor privileges. And at the same time, we saw some of these services in the previous panel, like whatever it's Ghana or it's Spotify, and they actually negotiate licenses, if you will, on normal copyright license terms.
Yes.
And that obviously does change the balance in the marketplace in a very significant way. So that's the problem. Now, what are the good news? The good news is that what we are seeing is that the policymakers in some countries are waking up to this problem and starting to address and take action. And I think it's worth saying that obviously I'm speaking for the music industry or copyright industries, if I may, but the issues are broader than just copyright industries. And you all probably have seen and you're aware of the calls for greater online platform responsibilities, because these platforms, they are not only distributing music, but they are now the main channels for distributing all kinds of content, including news and so forth. And they are equally monetizing the content that they distribute and monetizing the data that they gather and then sell on. So as an example of the sort of the positive developments in Europe, in the context of the so-called Digital Single Market Directive, the legislators have actually addressed this issue. So what they have done in this directive, in Article 17 to be precise, they have clarified the rules that apply to user upload content services. And I think it's important to note in this respect that in Europe what they have done is it really is a clarification. They are not changing the law. They are not creating new rights. They are not changing the safe harbors. They have wanted to clarify, if you will, the original intention and application of the safe harbor rules. So they've done three very important things. Article 17 confirms that the user upload content services that store and provide access to content uploaded by their users, and that engage actively with that content by promoting and optimizing it. They engage in a restricted act. They communicate that content to the public. Second, the Article 17 confirms that these services, when they are so active, they can't be eligible for the safe harbors. And the third point, what Article 17 does, it also consolidates the conditions that user upload content services must do to avoid liability in the absence of licenses. So it really clarifies the liability rules, which we believe in the long run will actually be beneficial both for the right owners, but also for the digital marketplace and the digital players, because it will level the playing field. So that is what we would maintain now, is that, if you will, the new best practice, the benchmark internationally that also other countries, including India, should be looking at and should consider. And then the other point that we believe is very important in the context of online platform liability is that we also need to view the quid pro quo, the deal struck with the passive platforms that are eligible for the safe harbors. And the key point there is that the original deal that was struck in the DMCA and in Europe referred to notice and takedown. Now what we see is, in this world where the volumes are so massive, notice and takedown is no longer proposed. What is needed is notice and takedown, which ensures that, again, what we would believe was the original purpose of these rules, which was that the platforms that enjoy safe harbors ensure that the infringements actually stop. Now, in the new world, what that means is that they not only need to take down, but they also need to ensure that the same content does not immediately reappear. So we need notice and stay. So that's my sort of brief few words to hopefully to stimulate the discussion.
Thanks, Laurie.
Whatever the requirement may be. But I believe that's the way law is, or the DNA of law is structured like that. It's always going to do a catching up game. There's no such thing as preemptive laws. There's no such thing as a situation where laws will be framed assuming something is going to come up. Having said that, the way a law is structured would have to be dynamic, so that it does not have to be changed every year or every other year, where natural progression in technology or changes in terms of usage, etc., were to happen. So as it stands today, we've already had a lot of changes in law for India when we speak about the Copyright Act and for the music industry. Some of it, in fact, is not something that many of us wanted also, right? So we've had the changes. There has been a bit of a gap now in terms of reviewing the status of the laws, how effectively they have functioned, and whether there should be further changes. After December 2018, with India having signed up for WTO, I think now the time is ripe for India to review its laws.
Mr. Raghavendra, you've had the benefit of being in government, particularly when the Copyright Act was being overviewed and when we had changes to our exceptions provision, which brought in a provision which has remained controversial from both sides, with one side saying it achieved nothing, it achieved too less, and with the other side saying that it delivered nothing. And the objective of having a safe harbor or having more has resulted probably in more confusion in where copyright law is concerned. We do have the IT Act. What is your perspective of where India stands from a legal perspective, particularly given what Laurie pointed out in terms of the development with the EU directive on the digital economy in Europe?
Thank you, Amit. I would like to thank my friend Blaise Fernandes for inviting me to be part of this very interesting panel, and also thanks to my friend Laurie opening up and explaining the importance of the ISP liability, both in international and national levels, because this very fascinating aspect of the copyright law, including the internet. And unfortunately or fortunately, we developed a system during the amendment to the Copyright Act 2012. We harmonized the good and bad things from the international level. Unfortunately, this happened because when this disruptive cutting-edge technologies hovering around the entire world, creating problem to the content owner and right owners, and also putting a lot of confusion in the minds of users, whether I'm infringing or I'm rightful user or all these things. But the first step was that when Uruguayan round was ending, WTO was being created, they decided that the internet issued in the copyright, they will not deal with, they will leave it to WIPO. When WIPO took up and then finalized two internet treaties, the WIPO Copyright Treaty and WIPO Phonograms and Performance Treaty, what they did in 1996, they were in tearing hurry. They did not take up all the things because the Web 2.0, as mentioned by him, Laurie, was a nascent technology, but as my friend sitting right mentioned that this has to be, they have to foresee that these things are happening. And always while drafting the law, we use techno-neutral language. So problem was that in the diplomatic conference, they knocked out audiovisual performances treaty. This happened later, a failed attempt in 2000, and again it came back in 2011 because of Indian affairs. They did not consider the issue of ISP liability, despite it was there. They said, there are different models of treating this, and understanding is not there because it's a developing technology, we'll leave it aside. And then US came out with a model in the DMCA in section 512 with the safe harbor proposal, which talks about only giving a notice and taking down when infringed content is uploaded. It is limited to that extent. which was implemented in various countries in a various model. And what France did it, they took the elements from the tort law, the due diligence, due care, and all that they imposed on the ISP liability, ISP provider, and they did introduce the safe harbor, and then many countries did it, whether Germany or Japan or China. India took that model, it introduced in its own way, but the time given in the original draft bill, if you see, 2010 draft bill which was introduced in the Rajya Sabha, which was sent to the standing committee, it gave only 14 days. And then many lawyers and legal communities started knocking door and telling us it's too limited, 14 days, if no court will give injunction or about this matter. And then finally the platform owner will be in trouble. And 51, we already covered the vicarious liability and the contributory liability of the various platforms. This was an exception to be provided to them from the infringement of the copyright. Then after the standing committee report came, the time was increased to 21 days, and much to the chagrin of the right owners. But still, it was the lesser period relatively, if you compare with the US laws. It was still a stricter one. But you see at the international level, unlike other minimum standards set by in the Article 15 for the communication to the public in the internet environment, or making available right was introduced, and anywhere and any time these things. But unfortunately, there are no minimum standards. US gave its own model, and then EU has come up. After 33 years has passed after all the WIPO internet treaties have come. These are not sufficient to protect creators or right owners' content on internet. Now various platforms have come, there's a disruption. Problem is lack of harmonization, because harmonization comes when minimum standards are by treaty. Many experts talk about treaty, but I advise that there is no need for treaty. If you look at the Article 24 administrative provisions, which talks about assembly, which clearly gives a mandate to the member nations of the WPPT that there is a possibility of the revision. Either you can introduce 15 bis or 16 bis to cover the ISP liability with the minimum standard, but minimum standard can be developed with the first step should be the WIPO, the Standing Committee of the Copyright and Related Right, SCCR, should take a decision. Either IFPI, which is the member there, NGO member, should influence the major content creating countries like US, UK, other European countries, including India, to take a decision, because as long as the pending agenda is exhausted, they are not going to take up the new agenda, but there is an urgent need to take this agenda, how to protect copyright in the new internet technologies. They have to study, pick out the best practices, not only the what EU has introduced, and then go ahead for revision of WPPT, if possible, the Beijing Treaty.
Yeah.
Then only is possible, because what standing, I just end my first round, what standing committee sent in its report 227, it advised the government, okay, what you have done, harmonizing with the WCT, WP is okay, but there are gaps. Internet is, growing, and portability is increasing, and piracy is also increasing. Despite Section 79 is there, rules are there, Rule 3 of the rules are there in the IT Act, these are not sufficient. IT department, they then Hajari, now DPIIT should sit together and deliberate with the stakeholders, and without sacrificing the access rights of the users and not criminalizing their access, how to protect the content, how to allow the right owner creator to monetize, and how to allow the innovations out, because various platforms are coming because of innovations and invention happening. That has to be encouraged and protected,
Thanks.
because those are the things going to help write owners and creators.
Thanks so much. Very interesting. Nikhil, when I started my practice, I remember vividly, we were very interested with cases like Religious Technology Center versus Netcom, and you had bulletin boards and administrators of bulletin boards, and you had the discussion around, primary liability and Playboy versus Frenna, these are all the old cases. And then you had the USDMCA, and when you've come to a stage today where you have this intermediary, the safe harbor, being a basis for protection or protection for large content dissemination platforms who link advertisements. The revenues are massive by anybody's reckoning, with market caps that are massive, and payments to creators and music owners, and particularly in the context of music. Would you think that we need to make now these distinctions between the passive intermediary, as Laurie pointed out, and intermediaries that use UGC to drive and monetize UGC, and draw distinction between these two types of preachers?
So I'm going to, since Laurie started with history, I'll get into history, but let me first answer one particular framing problem that I see with your question. Because you're talking about intermediaries as an entity, but the law looks at intermediary as a function. And so the same entity can be both a content provider. In fact, if you look at the way internet is structured and the way regulation is structured, there are only two types of entities which are contemplated. One is a user, which is both a creator and a consumer, and the other is an intermediary, which is a conduit for creation and consuming. So if you're going to view the internet from the perspective of content creator and a consumer, and then an intermediary in the middle, you're basically bringing a cable mindset to internet. The internet doesn't have a parallel in your traditional structures. So if you're going to say that this is a particular, even if you're classifying something as a content provider by itself, internet regulation doesn't recognize that. So, and that's actually the net neutrality framework for looking at things, that the conduit has to be neutral, right? So whether it's an ISP or it's a YouTube or it is anyone, it's a payment gateway, they're all intermediaries, because there's just allowing users to trade content and services. There's no such thing as a large content provider and me uploading a video on the internet. We're all treated equally. So I think in a lot of the discussions that have been happening around content regulation as well as intermediary liability, the framing is wrong because people are bringing an outdated mindset to the internet. But let me go back into history, because I think in all this talk, firstly, I would question the notion about whether the idea of an intermediary was only imagined in 99, 2000, and there were BBSs where content was being uploaded and shared back in the early 90s. So the internet started with this sharing mechanism through BBSs, and then other platforms started getting created. Yes, the scale is a problem right now, and that scale is a separate problem to deal with from a competition perspective. But India has a different history when it comes to intermediate liability, and it's important for us not to forget that. The core of it actually started with porn, that someone uploaded a pornographic clip on Bazi.com, and Avnish Bajaj got arrested because of it, right? And we went, and Safe Harbor was created to protect the lack of actual knowledge, right? And then when we went to court, because Section 79 was clearly not sufficient to protect legitimate content on the internet, because various types of intermediaries were taking down content because of frivolous written notices that were kept, we went to court. And what we got there, we didn't get exactly what we wanted, because we didn't want a notice and take down regime. We definitely didn't want a notice and stay down regime, which I will get to in a bit. What we wanted was a notice and take down, and if someone claims liability, put back up regime. We didn't get that. But what we got was a better definition of actual knowledge, which is different from how the DMCA, I believe, looks at it. And actual knowledge is only going to be applicable when a court order is given. So I would say that if you want to bring about, I mean, you would, when you want to, in some of these things, when you look at active versus passive participants, and I'm not a lawyer, you guys are, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. When you look at that active versus passive knowledge situation, it can only happen through a court order as far as I understand, right? So and that will have to be for each thing that is taken down. So my guess is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you would either have to change the law to overturn Shreya Singhal in order to get to this kind of a situation, or you would have to go to court and do that. Now, honestly, to my mind, the most shocking and I think the bizarrest thing that I've heard is about this ISP liability discussion. And I first heard it when Apoorv Nagpal, and I'd spoken with him back in 2011. We did an interview for Media Nama there, and he talked about it. I don't understand how this ISP liability regime, where you are creating a situation where ISPs will have to inspect packets to understand what kind of sites users are accessing, and then start taking down content, that deep packet inspection will not pass Puttaswamy. It is a disproportionate violation of privacy. So if an ISP liability regime does get created, I can guarantee to you that this will go to court, and we will get a reading of Puttaswamy in this context. So that's now.
I'm not quite sure you answered my question, because
No,
my
I'm now getting to your
you're
question.
warming up to it.
I'm now getting to your question. Your question was about whether the world has changed in a manner where there are certain entities like YouTube, which are large providers of content, and whether they should be treated differently from intermediaries, right? That was it. My answer quite simply is no. Because there's still a conduit for users like me to upload content. And as far as internet regulation is concerned, I'm a user as much as any other content company is a user on the internet, and we're not treated any differently. And if you would want to regulate types of entities, you would destroy the fundamental shape-shifting nature of the internet, where you start where an entity is providing one kind of intermediary function to begin with, and it keeps evolving over time. The more you have regulation, the more you will strengthen incumbents. So I would wonder whether YouTube will end up becoming stronger if you have regulations, and whether competition will not come up in that context, right? Now, there is a competition problem to be resolved over here, and the world is still trying to figure out how to go about doing that. The dominance of platforms is a serious problem that we have in the world today, because it reduces the playing field for new competition to come up. But I would say that by destroying safe harbor provisions, you would destroy the fundamental nature of the internet, which is about giving users a voice, and I'm not justifying piracy, but you have to develop mechanisms to counter piracy that don't change the fundamental nature of the internet, which is allowing users to upload content, share information, free speech, using intermediaries.
I'm mindful that, I'm tempted to get into a one-on-one argument, but I'm mindful of the fact that it's a panel discussion. So I'll ask Ms. Napena for, I know you've been wanting to respond.
Yeah, I've been literally a jack in the box trying to pop up for an intervention. I'm not necessarily opposing what Nikhil had said, but I just wanted to delineate the two things. The first aspect is, where you're coming from, Nikhil, is from a perspective of free speech and fundamental rights. Where Amit is coming from, or the question that he posed, was from the perspective of the music industry, to be very precise, because of this program here, or copyright industry as a broader genre. Is copyright a fundamental right? Right? So if copyright, and I would not even say if, that copyright is not a fundamental right, and is only a statutory right, delineates it in a completely different bucket from all the fundamental rights that you mentioned and the proportionality argument, etc. The real problem arises, and particularly when we are talking about intermediary liability, is this. On one hand, we are, and all of us, I think, will be on the same same plane when we talk about free speech and fundamental right. I don't think any of us want that diluted in any manner, either through dilution of safe harbor or through inclusion of active or passive filtering, etc. But when it comes to statutory right, when it comes to criminal actions, when it comes to filtration of criminal offenses or offensive content, then that stands on a completely different footing. Now, what is it that's a criminal act which mandates active filtering? What is it that is a violation which could just be resolved with a takedown? Again, now becomes the issue. Now, it's very interesting how the EU has moved into active filtration. Just to clarify what we are talking about when we say active or passive filtering is that when something is brought to my notice, I will bring it down. Active filtration is I am supposed to evolve and depute tools to identify and take down at the stage of upload content which is violative. So when we are talking about that as what the EU is planning to do, the first issue that arose, just to address it one at a time, is there is not going to be harmony. There is not going to be harmony even between the laws from US to EU. And if you're not going to have that harmony, and if companies are going to take the position that we are not amenable to your jurisdiction on this aspect, or if we comply with your law, then we are in violation of the Communications Act, or it's in violation of my rights under DMCA, that's going to be an issue. We really need to look at a much larger aspect of what is going to be the impact of Article 13 there. The second thing is, why are we clubbing intermediaries, and why do we have common laws today, whether it's in India, whether it's in the EU or in the US, dealing with things like copyright violation and also dealing with things like terrorism and hate speech and fake news, etc. We also saw the presentation earlier which talked about how tools are now being evolved primarily with focus on fake news and hate speech. But when you try to do a one-size-fits-all, there has to be a victim somewhere. And right now the victim I see predominantly is free speech. And just one clarification on Shreya Singhal, which is why I was jumping up and down, Nikhil, is it not only provides for intervention or takedowns when it is a court order, but also through a government order.
Through a government order, yes.
And that's a very powerful tool and much faster in terms of action than the court order.
But it will have to apply to each takedown.
Yes, for each takedown, there cannot be a blanket order in that sense.
So no John Does from the government.
And also
Lorry's
this
rebuttal.
is why on the earlier
Lorry's
one,
rebuttal.
yes, and this is why in the earlier instance when somebody was talking about blocking, I was a little concerned, because if you look at 69, 69A, etc., it does not allow for you to do blocking for copyright. There, Article 19(2), and it's very limited provisions. It doesn't even cover decency, morality, etc.
Administrative blocking.
That blocking cannot be resorted to for copyright.
Administrative blocking, not court order.
Yeah, and I personally feel we need to really delineate the purpose. Sorry, just delineate the purpose with the. I can see that, but my voice is so loud. I can hear.
Laurie,
Thank you. You might be shocked to hear. I don't completely disagree with you. I don't disagree with you on the point that absolutely we should not, and no one is proposing to treat intermediaries as a sort of a monolithic block. That's not the point here, right? And you're absolutely right that does, I mean, law doesn't treat them as a monolithic block either. They are indeed treated through the functions, right? So that's why you have specific rules for mere conduits, for caching services, and for hosting services. Article 17 does not deal with intermediaries generally either. And I think it's very important to bear that in mind. Article 17 provides a very specific solution to a very specific problem, which is the issue that we have user upload content services that wrongly claim to be covered by the safe harbor. They are not genuine intermediaries. There I completely disagree with you. They are advertising platforms that attract users, both advertisers and traffic, through distribution of content. And they compete head-on with pure content distribution services such as Sam or Ghana or Spotify here in India. So this is a question of fairness. It is a question of ensuring that there's a level playing field in the digital content marketplace. And that is the issue with Article 17. I also disagree actually with both of you when you say that copyright is not a fundamental right. It is. It is recognized in the rights of the Fundamental Rights Charter, right? Right to property, including intellectual property. So you can't.
India,
No, but this is
India
an
doesn't have a
international
right to
issue.
property.
This is an international. There's an international
Talking about
charter.
the international.
Yeah. So to say that free speech would always trump copyright, I would say is wrong. There are limits. You can't say I can steal your rights, your property, because I'm exercising my rights. I'm exercising rights when I upload Madonna's latest video on YouTube. That's bizarre. That's a bizarre claim, isn't it? It is. I'm sorry, it is. So the point again is Article 17 deals with a specific issue, a very specific issue, which is a distortion in the digital content marketplace. And that's when I say it is very important for all the copyright industries. It is also a very important part of society at large, that we have fairness in the marketplace. And that's where Article 17, as I said, it sets the best practices. And the other point, the last point is, when we speak of stay down, we are not speaking of DPI, deep packet inspection. The point is that what Article 17 says, in order to avoid liability in the absence of licenses, what you need to do is you need to take action to prevent infringements. And for instance, in sound recordings, what it means that there are technologies widely used already across many platforms, which is so-called ACR, automatic content recognition, which uses digital fingerprinting. It's not DPI.
So how do you expect an ISP to deploy that without inspecting packets? I mean, how do you operationalize it?
Again, we are speaking of very specific, we are not
I-
speaking
it
of
wa-
ISPs in general.
It might be in
In
law,
terms of- in
but
terms
how do
of
you
in-
implement it?
In terms of me moderating this lovely panel, Nikhil, a lot of the intermediaries have taken active monitoring measures when it comes to stuff like child pornography, terrorism. What's preventing the same platforms from extending these active monitoring measures to copyrights?
Again, so it depends on what level of platforms are actually deploying these tools. In case of, so you have Content ID in YouTube, on YouTube as well. So there are some platforms that are monitoring that are monitoring for videos and some kind of content. No doubt about that. But again, none of these tools are necessarily effective. They are not. There is the problem with the assumption that you'll have algorithms that can actively identify